This is our sequel number 72, Bishop Tucker in London, as well as the ordinations of that year. Welcome. We are celebrating the Church of Uganda at 150 years, and we are celebrating both the church and the state. I'm Christopher Amos Chikomekontambi, the author. Welcome. The Diocese of Uganda Bishop Tucker was in London by early 1907. He was able to meet the colonial and foreign secretary, who told him about two important visitors to East Africa. The first one was to be in 1907, while the other one was to visit in 1909. Who were the visitors? A very young man, the 32-year-old Winston Churchill, who at that time was the British Under Secretary of State for Colonies, and he would visit East Africa later in 1907. 2 years later, Bishop Tucker was told that the American President Theodore Roosevelt would visit East Africa, including Uganda, in 1909, and that the Church Missionary Society would play its role in preparing the native ruler, Prince Chua, or the Kabaka designate Chua II, to receive the visitors in Buganda's capital, Mengo. As I've just told you that early 1907, the bishop was in London. He suffered from severe rheumatism, probably which he got from Uganda. Thank God he recovered. On a visit to St. Michael's Cornhill Church, the bishop boasted that Uganda Diocese had by that time 4,000 lay evangelists and 1,000 church structures. Bishop Tucker returned to Uganda and arrived at Entebbe by sea on the 23rd of March, 1907. Ngora, which was the mission station of the CMS for Northern and Eastern, where the Reverend Leonard Kiching was, in that year he also visited London. And he actually married a woman called Minnie, not Winnie, but Minnie Beatrice Leod. By that time he had grown, he was almost 31 years, and he brought his wife to Uganda. Unlike Bishop Tucker, who never brought his wife to Uganda, and their son, Kiching, brought his wife to Uganda. As a matter of fact, in 1909, they got a bouncing baby boy who they baptized Harold Lancelot. Now, we want to go to the ordinations. In that year, there were some important ordinations. The ordinations were of native deacons, whereas the others were priesthood. The native deacons who were ordered were Joshua Chiwaku, Elia Mukasa, Anderea Sere, and Yosia Kamuhigi. Now, these were additions to the existing native clergy, who I must insist that by 1907, they were still not allowed to wear the neck hood, or what the majority of you call the collar. For example, the original priests, Yonasani Kaizi, Yairo Mutachala, Henry Dutachitakule, Bartolomayo Zimbe, Nassanairi Mudeka, Edward Bakayana, Thomas Senfuma, No Chiwafu, Shadraka Chibuka, Serwana Aliwonya, Apollo Chivebulaya, Mikaili Bagenda, Yoweri Namumanyanga, Yakobo Njovu, and Daniel Rwanga. By 1907, they were native priests, but they could not wear the neck hood. 1907 is still important in history because in that year there is a letter which was written by the governor of Uganda, Governor Hesketh Bell, and the letter was dated the 18th of February 1907, it was being written to the British Prime Minister, Sir Henry Campbell Bowman. He formally initiated in that letter the permission to exhume and repatriate home the remains of fallen Ssekabaka Mwanga II. In the same letter, I have seen a copy of this letter at the archives, at the Uganda National Archives. Now, in the same letter, the governor also accounted for the presence of Omukama, former Omukama Kabarega, and his son George as being in the Seychelles. The process moved on, that process of exhuming and repatriating the remains. The process moved, but Hesketh Bell was frustrated by the slow pace of the Foreign and Colonial Office in London towards that. And therefore, we shall see more of of how that ended in our future sequels. Then, in the same 1907, the Buganda 1900 Agreement was amended yet again. We've already seen a cultural cases judgment amendment in 1905, but now in 1907 there was another amendment, and this one was to affect forests, and therefore it was called the Buganda Memorandum Agreement Forests 1907. In these amendments, the British gave up the forests to the Kingdom of Buganda to ensure their continuity and to ensure that the Baganda maintain those forests as woodland. And therefore, for the first time in history, the Sebwana, the Mugema, Kate, Joshua Wambwa signed. He signed as a witness with the others because he was so happy. Remember, in the 1900 agreement, 1,500 square miles were reserved for forests, and the British were the ones to look after them. But now, in this agreement, that responsibility shifted to the people of Buganda. In 1907, still in 1907, the Archdeacon of Uganda, Herbert Walker, visited Nassa. Nassa was this area of Karagwe, Bukoba, northern Tanzania, which was still part of Uganda diocese. So the mission station there was called Nassa. So the Archdeacon of Uganda visited Usukuma CMS stations in northern Tanganyika, and he also saw the German administrators there. They were not very friendly to the Church Missionary Society, but the area had minimal supervision of the CMS, and therefore their being uncomfortable with that did not matter that much. Still in the year 1907, the first Luganda newspaper was launched. It was called Agafa. It was 8 pages and 400 copies were circulated. The publishers were the Uganda Company, which also published the Uganda Notes, which was an English newspaper. And all these were for the Church Missionary Society. Now, both papers mainly reported on missionary activities. It also, this Luganda paper, carried some limited native local news. The British Protectorate government continued to publish in Kenya's East African Official Gazette by January 1907. So any gazetting that was required by the Uganda Protectorate was always done in the Kenya East Africa Official Gazette. Remember, that's where the death of ex-Ssekabaka Mwanga was made also. That was because Uganda did not have any such newspaper of its own. We shall see the visitation of the visitors, the ones who the British told Alfred Tucker about in our next sequels. May the good Lord bless us all.